So I've told this story before, but I just love the story. That when I was in the seminary, one of my favorite professors, his best friend was this priest from Portland, and his name was Father Frank. And Father Frank, I really enjoyed because he was just really different. He's kind of kooky, and I like kooky people. And like he had these thick glasses, and this would crack me up. He could start his cigarette by using his glasses as a magnifying. And he was actually incredibly funny. But he also started the St. James Society, which is priests taking 1 year to work with the poorest of the poor somewhere in the world. And he was a priest from Portland, but he actually had worked years in the poorest places in the world. And because he smoked and because he lived in these really poor places, he had terrible health problems later in life. And he actually had to retire early because he had heart problems, and he was literally dying, so they put him in retirement. And rather than go into a priest's home, he actually rented this small apartment in Burnside, Portland. Now, Burnside, at the time, years ago, it was Skid Row of Portland. It was like the bad section of town. And he rented this little apartment, and every day he would get up really early, go to the parish, and he took this Safeway shopping cart, and he would make sandwiches and load it with sandwiches and these huge urns of coffee. And he would just go to this park bench, same one, and hand out coffee and sandwiches to the inebriated knights of the road and the ladies of the evening and the drug addicts. He was basically kind of this, they called him the angel of Burnside, because he really loved these people and he looked out for them. No proselytizing, just compassion. And the part that cracked me up is that he stole that Safeway shopping cart. And somebody said, "Frank, you stole that shopping cart." He said, "Hey, Jesus needed a donkey and took a donkey. I need a shopping cart." But he really showed great love towards really the down and out people. And the Portland newspaper found out about it and did this article on the angel in Burnside. And it's kind of, this is the best part. I love this line where the interviewer says, "Why do you do this? You know, you're coming to the end of your life. You don't have too much longer. Why do you choose to live in Skid Row with these people?" And his answer was, "All my life I have fed on the bread of life, and my life will be bread. No, sorry, my life will be bread for others." I just love that. Rather than go to a safe, nice retirement center for the priests, he took this place on Skid Row. And what's interesting is that the priests, when they read this article on Frank, they decided that they'd all donate a little something to help pay for the sandwiches and coffee. So they all wrote him a check, and you know what he did? He sent every check back with a little note that said, "Make your own damn sandwiches." Which I just love. But really, today is the Feast of Corpus Christi, the body and blood of Christ. And like we have all these titles for the Eucharist. And we do. We have lots of titles for the Eucharist being one of them. But I just want to go over some of the titles because it may be a little boring. I have to admit this. It's more classroomy. But I love this stuff. And some of my favorite titles for the Eucharist, one is the bread of life. That's what Frank said, remember? And each title means something slightly different. So like the bread of life, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." Jesus literally says that. That's odd, strange. But when it says bread of life, it means this idea that in the Eucharist, God gives you life. And you have to return the Eucharist back to God by giving life to other people. That's exactly what Father Frank was doing. So for all those who receive the body and blood of Christ, you're to bring life to the world. I love that. And in the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus gives the Our Father, you know, in the Our Father where we say, give us each day our daily bread, nowhere did Jesus ever say that. That's actually an awful, horrible translation. In the Gospel of Luke, he says, actually, epiousios. Pray for epiousios. The bread of substance that gives life its life. It's not really easily translated, but it's the bread that gives life, the bread of life. That's what you pray for at Mass, and you're going to receive it. And you have to give that life to other people. Love that image. Another one is the bread from heaven. In the Gospel of Matthew, which is different than Luke, in Matthew, in the Lord's Prayer, you pray for the bread of the eschaton. And we'd have to translate that to make sense, the bread from heaven. And in the Old Testament, you have this, you should know the story of the bread from heaven. Remember, they have the Passover meal, they escape the soldiers, and they're in the desert for 40 years, a lifetime, but there's no food. And so Moses prays, and the manna comes. The bread from heaven comes. Manna in Hebrew just means, what is it? Doesn't that crack you up? That's its name. Like, they look at it and say, what is it? And it's the bread from heaven. And the Jews had this idea, which we have as well, that in the temple of heaven, that is where the bread of heaven is stored. And the bread of heaven has always existed. It existed before God created the universe. This is the Jewish idea and our idea. But Moses could pray, and God sent him the bread from heaven. And the angels guard the bread of heaven. The bread of heaven is guarded by the angels. That's why if you go to our adoration chapel, you'll see an angel outside. It's mimicking the temple in heaven. Does that make sense? And Jews, one of the signs of the Messiah is that the Messiah would be a new Moses. In the same way Moses could pray and the bread would come, the Messiah, the angels have got to obey. So the Messiah could pray and the bread from heaven would come down. That would be the sign, the sign. So if you remember, like in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus does the multiplication of loaves and they love it, and so they say, let's make him king, Messiah. And Jesus doesn't want to be their version of a king or Messiah. So he runs off, and they find him, and they go to him, and they say, do the sign. Now, if you read that, not knowing the bread from heaven, you'll be thinking they just want a miraculous trick. They say, do the sign. What's the sign of the Messiah? Oh, come on, I just told you. Really, nobody gets this? What's the sign that you are the Messiah? Okay, why is it, once again, only this side that pays attention? I got to work with you people. Yes, he can have the bread come down. And when they say to Jesus, do the sign, what does he say? I am the bread that came down from heaven. He proclaims himself the bread of heaven. And they say, well, we can't eat you, and they get upset. But we do believe that he is the bread from heaven. Love that, and you pray for it in the Lord's Prayer just before Mass. This is actually my favorite, but it's the most obscure, is it's talking about the Eucharist, the face of God. And I frankly was shocked because I was talking to a priest this week, and I mentioned to him that one of the names of the Eucharist is the face of God, and he says, I've never heard that. It's in the Bible. How could you not have heard that? So I punched him in the face. No, I didn't. I was kidding. But, I don't know how he can be Catholic, and especially a Catholic priest, and for the love of God, not know that. No, really, you should be embarrassed. You remember Moses when he, at the covenant, he looks up to heaven. What does the face of God look like? Not this beautiful thing. The face of God looks like a meal. And so God commands Moses that they must keep this covenant of the face of God, that every Sabbath you have to put 12 loaves of unleavened bread and 2 flagons of wine on a white marble table. Now, guess what the table that we put the bread and wine on before Mass? Anybody know? Once again, these guys got it. I don't know what's wrong with you. A white marble table. And it's come forward, it's put in front of the tabernacle. Remember, in the Holy of Holies, there's 3 things: altar, tabernacle, candle. The bread and wine are placed every Sabbath on the table, and they're consecrated. When it's consecrated, it's called the face of God. And it says in the book of Leviticus that all people must appear before the face of God 3 times a year. So 3 times a year, what the priest would do is pick up the entire altar. They wouldn't pick up the tabernacle, the ark, the ark. They didn't pick up the candle. They picked up the altar with the face of God on it and brought it out in the courtyard so all people could stand before it. It's basically an early form of adoration. But in the Bible, when you're reading the Bible and it'll say Jacob saw the face of God, it doesn't mean the actual face of God. Jacob was a horrible, selfish person, sees the face of God, and suddenly becomes more loving. The idea is that week after week after week, we appear before the face of God, and we move a little bit more away from selfishness, a little bit more into the image of love. And the image of God is love. The face of God that the Eucharist provokes is the image of God. We come back Sabbath after Sabbath so that we can reflect this image of love, the Eucharist. And when you die, what does the book of Revelation say heaven is like? This huge Eucharistic banquet, this wedding feast of the Eucharistic banquet. So all during our life, we're guided by the Eucharist until we enter the promised land of heaven. And there we do stand before the face of God again. But we prepared for it all our lives by coming here, trying to let the Eucharist make us a little bit more into the image of love. I love that idea of the face of God. And like today's Mass is, oh my God, I forgot the name. Today's Mass is for priest. No, it's not Lou. It's Father. Okay, now, listen, Carson. Run back into the sacristy, open the door that I keep my vestments in, and there's a red letter that says, don't forget the 11 o'clock Mass is for Father so-and-so. Run, go run, like a rabbit. I'm not kidding. Run back. I'm an idiot. I forget the name. Oh, okay, I meant Walker. So go back and get it. Just look in the cabinets till you find it. We're not moving on till Mass till you run back there. I'm serious. Move. Push him out of the chair. Walker, seriously, I need that name. How do you work with these kids? Try and embarrass them. Anyhow, so we're praying for this priest who died. He's actually, I think, from Chicago. But anyhow, in the Eucharistic prayer, it's going to say, his name, and then we're going to say that he stand before the face of God. What he's going to stand before is this great Eucharistic feast. That's what we're praying for. So, couple more. I know this is a little boring, but I love this stuff. Another title for the Eucharist I love, and this one's going to shock you, is the New Testament. And unfortunately, when you say the New Testament, a lot of people think it means a book. The New Testament is not a book. Jesus, you're a good kid. Jesus, when he refers to the, okay, applause, because he's got me the name. Oh, thank you. James. It's a tough name. Father James. Jesus, when he refers to the New Testament, he only refers to the Eucharist, not a book. In the 7 places that it mentions the New Testament, in the New Testament, it doesn't refer to a book. It refers to the Eucharist. I know that sounds strange, but the word testament and covenant are the exact same words in Greek. You can translate it either way. And the apostles, when you said New Testament or ancient Christians, they weren't thinking of a book, because remember, it took several hundred years to write the New Testament down and compile it. But the point being is that the New Testament was a sacrament long before anybody thought of it as a book. And that's why, like, the first reading and the second reading, it mentions the word covenant, testament. The first one was Moses. The second one, the new everlasting covenant, is the Eucharist. So my only point being is that, like, people think it's a book. To me, that's like, Jesus said, do this in memory of me. Do what? Not write a book, not read a book. Do the Eucharist. And so, like I don't understand people that some people just want to study the New Testament. I love the New Testament. I love studying the Greek in it. But the New Testament book points to the covenant of the New Testament, the sacrament of the Eucharist. To me, that's like driving to the airport, and when you see the sign, airport 2 miles, you stop there at the sign. The sign points to the reality. The reality is 2 miles down the road. Does that make sense? The Eucharist is the New Testament. So the point being is that if you want to be a New Testament Christian, then you'll end up being a Eucharistic Catholic. And so just one last thing. You know that story told about Father Frank, and the interviewer said, "Why do you choose to live here? Why do you live here?" You know, the point being is that in your life, something has got to guide your life. Something's got to guide it and give it direction. You know, and God forbid if it's the Kardashians. But the woman, the interviewer, clearly she did think that, because why would you choose to live with the poor and your last dying days spend with these horrible people? Her life seemed to be guided by comfort. His life seemed to be guided by the Eucharist. And the word bread from heaven, by the way, remember, that lasts 40 years until you make it to the promised land. The bread from heaven is a thing that guides you to the promised land. So at the very end of Mass, we're going to take the Blessed Sacrament, go out this door, go to the four directions, and it's just acting out this idea that the thing that guides us throughout our life really is the Eucharist, the face of God, the living bread, the New Testament. Hopefully, really, like for all of us, we're like Frank, that after a lifetime of exposing ourselves to the face of God, we really do live this image of ultimate love. And so together, let us stand and profess our faith.